We landed on Karn 9, under a sky the color of static. Dust hissed against the shuttle's hull as the thrusters cooled, settling over us like ash. The planet was a graveyard of dunes, each one shifting with a rhythm too steady to be natural. I remember thinking it sounded like breathing. I am Ferrin Luth, Tech Adept 3rd Class, attached to the 89th Exploratory Detachment of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Our mission parameters were clear. Locate residual trace of pre-imperial alloy readings buried beneath the eastern equatorial wastes. Standard survey operation. That is what we were told. The first anomaly arrived before we even unpacked the crawler. The Auspex registered no life for hundreds of kilometers, yet the air tasted metallic, as if something had recently died nearby. Servo skulls drifted outward to map the terrain, but the data feed pulsed irregularly. Not interference. A heartbeat. The same interval, the same pulse, repeating every 7.3 seconds. I adjusted calibration twice before realizing the signal wasn't mechanical. It was alive, or at least something imitating life. By the 3rd hour, the sun had turned pale and circular behind the dust veil. We began surface scans, laying relay pylons to triangulate the readings. When one of the skulls returned, its optic array was gone, melted smooth, as though pressed against a furnace. No weapon discharge, no environmental burn signature. The machine had simply died of contact. Magos Val ordered a containment perimeter and recited the canticle of rational protection. The wind stopped when he finished. Every sound died except the heartbeat under the sand. We dug where the signal peaked. The upper crust gave way too easily, revealing a layer of metal unlike any I had seen, dark, seamless, and soft to the touch. When my gauntlet brushed it, frost formed around my fingers. It wasn't cold, it was hungry. I recorded surface resonance patterns, and the Auspex emitted a tone like a human sigh. The Magos said nothing, but his servo arm trembled. At 0200 hours, we uncovered the remains of a human skeleton positioned upright against the metal layer, mouth open in a silent scream. No burial, no decay pattern consistent with time. And the strangest thing, the bones were clean, polished, as though scraped by millions of tiny blades. The flesh must have been removed recently, but we were the first life to set foot here in millennia, according to every record. Val ordered an immediate transmission to orbit. The Vox carried his voice halfway, before it fractured into echoes, replaying phrases in reverse. Blessed is the, and then nothing. We ran diagnostics. The Vox was intact. The signal itself was being mirrored back at us from below ground. When I tried to shut it down, the receiver emitted a low tone that made my teeth ache. The same rhythm. 7.3 seconds. We retreated to the crawler to regroup. Night on Karn 9 is an illusion, just deeper shades of grey. I watched the dunes through the viewport and realized they were moving, but not with the wind. The sand shifted inward, as though something vast beneath it inhaled slowly, then exhaled. Each breath matched the signal's timing. I recorded it until the battery drained, though the sound continued in my ears long after the device died. At 0340 hours, the ground cracked open a few meters from camp. The sand poured downward like water over a ledge, revealing a black cavity far too symmetrical to be natural. I swear I heard voices from within, monotone, ritualistic, reciting something in Binharic patterns older than Mars itself. When Val turned to order the seal, the ground trembled again, and the chanting grew louder, layered with static and, no, not static, screams. Then everything went silent. And that was when the heartbeat stopped. When the tremor subsided, the sand settled into silence so absolute it pressed against the mind. Val activated his lumen staff and advanced toward the breach. The light spilled down the jagged hole, revealing a corridor of perfect black metal. No seams, no rivets, no markings of manufacture. It was as if the world itself had been hollowed out by precision beyond reason. I followed, recorder active, though each step felt like trespassing into something awake. The air grew colder the deeper we looked, heavy with the scent of ozone and rusted blood. We descended, 6 of us in total. The walls were smooth yet uneven to the eye, absorbing the light as though feeding on it. I reached out. The surface pulsed faintly beneath my glove. Biofeedback sensors spiked. There were trace organics interlaced with the alloy. When I scraped a sample, it bled, thin, silver fluid that evaporated into vapor before it hit the ground. The medic, Saren, knelt to analyze it, but his auspex began transmitting distorted human laughter. He turned it off without a word. Further in, we reached a chamber shaped like a sphere split by walkways of the same black alloy. Our boots made no sound. Embedded in the floor were patches of what looked like stone, but closer inspection revealed textured human skin, stretched thin and fused seamlessly into the metal. I could still make out fingerprints. The medic whispered a prayer. No one responded. Margos Val began reciting the canticle of diagnostic inquiry, his voice trembling through the vox. As he spoke, the walls emitted low vibrations that mimicked his cadence. Each word returned a half-beat later, twisted into Binharic syntax we could not translate. The echoes built into a mechanical choir, repeating his final phrase, confirm origin, until it collapsed into static. Then the chamber went utterly dark. Emergency lumens flared back seconds later, but one of us was gone. Trooper Dell, the youngest, had vanished without noise. Only his vox bead remained on the floor, still transmitting. I picked it up, expecting static, but heard him screaming in reverse, his voice fragmented into syllables that resembled the same ritual chant we'd heard from above. I pulled power from the unit, but the noise persisted, even with the casing crushed in my hand. Val ordered retreat, his logic subroutines flickering between command and denial. The descent route had changed. The tunnel's shape no longer matched our entry scans. Every turn redirected us deeper, each passage subtly narrowing, pressing against our armor, until movement felt like crawling through a throat of steel. We attempted to cut a new path with melter charges. The explosion produced no sound, only a flash that ended in silence. When the smoke cleared, the wall had reassembled, smooth again, seamless, as though nothing had ever touched it. Saren began to panic, muttering that the place was feeding off us. His auspex blinked with new readings, organic matter detected directly beneath our boots. He insisted something alive was inside the walls, moving parallel to us. The rhythmic pulse returned, louder now, syncing with our own heartbeats. 7.3 seconds, always 7.3. We followed the signal to a smaller antechamber. In its center lay a human corpse, still clothed in Mechanicus red, though centuries of decay should have reduced it to dust. The flesh was new, untouched by time, as if death had happened moments ago. When I turned the head to scan the face, I dropped the scanner. The corpse was me, my own features, perfect and expressionless, as if asleep. Val froze, then activated the emergency beacon, but the vox emitted nothing. Only the pulse remained. The heartbeat was beneath us now, deep and deliberate, like the stirring of a buried god. The air began to hum with resonance frequencies far beyond human tolerance. My vision blurred. Then, through the static, a voice whispered my name from inside my helmet, and the walls started to breathe. The walls inhaled. A low-pressure wave rolled through the chamber, tugging at our robes, flattening the sound inside our helmets. The alloy flexed outward like skin under breath. Lumen strips flickered, their light bending as though drawn into the surface itself. Val raised his staff and shouted an activation prayer, but the vox fractured his words into a chorus of hollow echoes. Each syllable came back, changed. Older, mechanical, half-human. I felt them vibrate through the bone of my skull. Then the lights died. Total darkness, complete as burial. Only the rhythmic pulse remained, closer now, matching my heartbeat until I could not tell which belonged to me. Something brushed my gauntlet, a texture too smooth to be dust. I aimed my lumen, but nothing reflected. The light simply vanished. My breath fogged the inside of the visor. I could hear my own pulse climbing to match the deeper one below. When illumination returned, Karen was gone. In his place lay his Auspex, still recording. The display showed movement all around us, hundreds of life signatures closing in, then disappearing in unison. I replayed the FAM feed and realized the signatures weren't approaching. They were inside the walls, watching us through the metal. Val began chanting faster, desperate, the binary of faith rising to a scream. A hidden seam opened at the far side of the chamber, revealing a downward corridor lined with dark alcoves. Within each, faint glimmers moved. We had no choice but to enter. The passage curved in impossible geometry, each step shifting gravity's pull. The alcoves stretched endlessly, filled with humanoid forms of glass black metal, resting upright. Rows upon rows, silent sentinels waiting for a signal. I approached one, drawn by faint warmth radiating from its chest plate. Inside the metal, under a transparent layer, veins of red fluid pulsed like living blood. The Necron construct turned its head slightly, the motion so fluid it felt human. Then another moved, and another. Val ordered retreat, voice cracking with feedback. But before we could turn, a sound rippled through the corridor, a harmony of tones that formed a single phrase inside my mind. We remember hunger. The constructs stepped forward, their eyes ignited with emerald fire, not bright but deep, like light trapped beneath water. They advanced without footsteps, gliding, their bodies whispering against the air. Our weapons did nothing. Lasfire dispersed into vapor before reaching them. One reached Val and passed its hand through his chest like a blade of liquid glass. The Margos convulsed, his body collapsed inward, armor folding around nothing. Where he had stood was only a hollow impression in the dust. I froze, paralyzed not by fear but comprehension. The machines weren't killing, they were feeding. They absorbed the organic structure, converting matter to echo. Val's scream continued long after his body was gone, reverberating in the metal around us. I ran, down another corridor, through shapes that shifted like mercury. The walls pulsed faster, breathing harder, the rhythm accelerating beyond my heartbeat. I stumbled into a new chamber, a cathedral of black crystal columns, humming with residual life. Across its center, streams of viscous fluid ran like veins, glowing faintly. Within the liquid, fragments of bone drifted in slow spirals. I knew then the tomb was not opening. It was awakening through us, using our flesh as ignition. The floor split beneath me. I caught the edge of a broken platform, staring down into a chasm glowing with green mist. Figures moved within it, assembling themselves from shards of bone and wire. Their faces were human for a moment, then gone. My name echoed from below in 1,000 voices, and in that instant, the tomb exhaled, breathing out the dead. The exhalation was not air, it was data, heatless, colorless, but heavy as a tide. It struck my chest and filled my vox with whispers, strings of binary that looped into words I almost recognized. My suit systems rebooted on their own, screens flashing ancient sigils instead of imperial code. When the static cleared, I was no longer on the ledge. I stood within a different hall, identical in shape, yet darker, older. The crystal columns were gone. In their place were cables strung like tendons, dripping faint light into the floor. Everything pulsed with the same impossible rhythm, but now I could hear the spaces between pulses, like breath catching in a dying throat. I moved forward, though the direction meant nothing here. Gravity felt uncertain, sometimes pulling sideways, sometimes downward. I passed fragments of metal bodies half fused to the walls. Some bore remnants of red cloth, the faded symbol of Mars burned into their plates. Others were little more than skeletons, their skulls elongated and hairless, their jaws fused shut by strands of alloy. When my lumen swept across them, their eyes flickered. reflex, or memory. I whispered the litany of identification to myself, but the words tasted hollow. This place was rewriting everything it touched, language included. At the chamber's center stood a dais of dark glass. Embedded within it was a console older than any Mechanicus pattern. Yet it responded to my presence as though it remembered me. Streams of characters unfolded across its surface, fragments of exploration logs, all marked with the seal of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The timestamps were centuries apart, but the names of the team were always the same. Ferin Luth, Magos Val, Tseren, Del. Over and over in hundreds of entries. The realization froze my lungs. We had done this before, perhaps endlessly. I accessed the earliest fragment. The recording flickered, showing a grainy image of myself, younger, cleaner, speaking the same opening report I had sent only hours ago. My voice was calm, confident, unaware. Then the image distorted, colors bleeding into green haze. Behind my mirrored figure, shadows moved, Necron constructs bending over a prone body that looked exactly like me. The file ended with my voice reciting the same words now echoing through the chamber. We remember hunger. A pulse rolled through the floor, interrupting the feed. The console's surface warped, reforming into a lattice of bone and wire. From beneath it, a thin arm emerged, human in shape but metallic in texture, veins of light running beneath its skin. The hand grasped my wrist gently, almost pleadingly, and I felt memory flood through contact, not images, time. I saw every version of this mission overlapping like stacked reflections. Every iteration descending, dying, awakening, repeating. The tomb did not exist in one timeline. It consumed all of them. Each expedition fed the next, layers of history condensed into a single loop of flesh and metal, endlessly rewriting itself to remain alive. The arm tightened, and I heard my own voice whisper inside my skull, "You are the last variant." The console shut down. The chamber's hum deepened, becoming rhythmic, deliberate, intelligent. Along the walls, the half-fused corpses began to stir. Their eyes burned green, their mouths opening soundlessly as thin threads of silver fluid rose from their throats. The vapor coiled upward, forming symbols in the air, sigils repeating the same phrase in countless dialects. Feed the core. I tried to sever the connection, cutting through the tendons of wire that held the dais together. Each slice bled a sound like distant thunder. The vapor turned crimson and fell as mist, coating my armor in thin residue. My auspex rebooted again, but this time it displayed a single line of text repeating endlessly, "Biological matter accepted." Beneath my feet, something vast shifted. The floor peeled open like an eyelid, revealing the black beneath. I glimpsed machinery the size of cathedrals, all connected by organic conduits pulsing with red light. It was alive, and it was starving. A deep resonance filled the space. Not words now, but thought pressed directly into the nerves. We learned your shape, your faith, your fear. You built the gods that sleep within us. Every surface vibrated. The light turned green-white, searing the air. My armor cracked as energy forced its way through, filling every gap, tasting every molecule. For a moment, I thought it would dissolve me too, another entry in its recursion. Then the light snapped off, and silence swallowed the hall once more. I collapsed beside the dais, my lungs raw. The console reignited one last time, displaying a single timestamp, M40.001, identical to our own, and beneath it, a log author's tag that read, "Ferin Luth, terminated." I stared at the terminal's flickering text until the letters bled into one another. The timestamp pulsed in rhythm with the tomb's hidden heartbeat. M40.01, our time, our mission, written and ended before it began. My gauntlet shook as I reached to shut the console off, but the metal beneath my hand was soft, pliant, almost warm. When I pulled away, Filaments clung to my fingers like wet sinew. The dais had begun to absorb the residue of my touch. I stepped back, and the entire chamber responded. Lights flickering, walls expanding with a faint hiss, as if inhaling me into its system. Through the comm bead, a voice broke the silence. "Luth, confirm status." It was Saren. Impossible. I turned sharply, but only the shifting black remained. "You shouldn't be down there," the voice continued, distant yet calm. "You know what happens if you stay." My throat locked. "Saren is dead," I whispered, more to myself than to any machine. The vox crackled, then came his laughter, hollow and stretched. "We all are. That's the point." I ran. The corridor reformed around me, smooth metal skin sliding over itself to guide me deeper. The air vibrated with energy, every lumen flaring in pulse with the rhythmic sound I could no longer separate from my own heartbeat. I turned into a wider hall where the architecture resembled ribs curving overhead, dripping with condensation that smelled of copper and ozone. The center stood something like a throne, half machine, half flesh, its backrest formed from coiled vertebrae of alien origin. Upon it lay a figure sealed in crystal, humanoid but not human. The crystal pulsed faintly, as though breathing. I stepped closer, data slate raised to record. The figure within was skeletal, encased in gold circuitry that wove through exposed muscle like veins. Parts of its face were missing, replaced with smooth mirrored plating that reflected not my body, but a version of myself already half consumed. When I touched the casing, the surface rippled outward and dissolved into mist. The corpse's eyes opened, green fire glowing behind sockets that had no depth. My vox screamed with static as the figure's mouth moved without sound. The tomb itself translated, "Consumption sequence incomplete. Correction in progress." The machine lord rose, fragments of crystal sloughing away like skin. Its gaze locked to me, and for a heartbeat I saw within those lights a vast plain of dead stars, each one whispering the same word: hunger. I fired my sidearm instinctively. The bolts passed through it, absorbed like raindrops into water. It advanced, step by step, with the stillness of inevitability. The floor reconfigured around me, cables erupting from the metal, latching onto my legs. I fell backward, struggling against their cold grip as they burrowed into my armor seams. Every contact point flooded with sensation, a flood of alien thought bleeding into my nervous system. I saw cities turn to dust, dynasties buried in silence, worlds devoured not for sustenance, but remembrance. The Necron Lord spoke directly within my skull. Flesh decays, data endures. But memory rots unless fed. My own voice answered without consent. "You feed on us." It inclined its head, the gesture almost gentle. "We preserve you in the only way possible." Around us, the tomb shuddered. The ribbed walls flexed as conduits ignited, channeling rivers of light toward the throne. I felt my body lifted, drawn by magnetic resonance, the cables pumping something cold into my veins. The machine lord extended one talon to my temple and pressed it lightly. A flood of binary cascaded through me, rewriting language, reordering thought. I understood then. The tomb's hunger was not for flesh alone. It devoured identity. Each mind consumed became a pattern of memory sustaining its failing dynasty. We were the nutrient. I gathered what little strength remained and recited the litany of circuit severance, forcing my systems to overload. Sparks erupted across my chest as the cables recoiled. The Lord stepped back, observing, almost curious. "You cannot break recursion," I whispered through gritted teeth. "I already have," the thing answered in my own voice. The chamber lights dimmed. The air thickened with the scent of ozone and blood. The machine lord sank back onto its throne, closing its eyes as if entering dream. The conduits retracted, sealing the floor smooth once more. I staggered upright, trembling, my armor slick with condensation. As I backed away, the throne whispered one final message across the vox band, cold and certain. Your reflection has already taken your place above. Then the crystal reformed, sealing it inside again, as if it had never awakened at all. The silence afterward was unbearable. It pressed against my skull like water, a crushing stillness where even the sound of my breath felt intrusive. I stood in that hall of bone and alloy, staring at the reformed crystal that now gleamed faintly under my trembling lumen. The Necron lord within appeared dormant once more, but something about the rhythm of its inner light felt too deliberate, as though it pulsed in time with my own heart. The cables along the walls no longer moved, yet the faint vibration through the metal under my boots told me the tomb still lived, watching, thinking, digesting. I turned and began to move back the way I'd come, though the corridors no longer obeyed logic. Each path bent subtly, reshaping itself between glances. Symbols that hadn't been there before now glowed on the walls, fractured pictograms that flickered between human and Xeno's script. I recognized fragments of the machine cant, but inverted, mirrored, corrupted. One line pulsed brighter than the rest, repeating in thin light. Recursion completes through acceptance. I whispered it once, testing the sound. My vox repeated the phrase back to me in a second voice, my own, but hollow, echoing from somewhere ahead. The next chamber I entered was colder. Frost had begun to crawl across the walls, spreading from a central dais where a body lay motionless. It was a guardsman from our detachment, the insignia half buried beneath ice. His armor had been split open down the chest, revealing metal beneath, polished ribs of living alloy replacing bone. His face was still human, eyes wide open, reflecting the lumen's glow. I reached out to confirm death, but the moment my glove brushed his cheek, the eyes shifted and focused on me. Luth. My name escaped his lips in a voice layered with static. I staggered backward. The corpse sat upright in a single fluid movement, frost breaking away like brittle glass. His mouth opened wider, stretching, reshaping. Words spilled out, torn between frequencies, half binary, half prayer. Flesh, required, memory, stabilizes the core. You were chosen. The skin along his neck split, revealing thin threads of circuitry pulsing with green light. His hands grasped at the floor as though anchoring himself to existence. I drew my pistol and fired. The bolt struck center mass, but instead of bursting, the wound absorbed the blast entirely, emitting a flash of heatless light. The flesh around it liquefied, reforming into metallic filigree. The guardsman looked down at the mark and whispered, almost tenderly, "We are not dying. We are continuing." Then he lunged. I met him halfway, slamming my blade into his shoulder. The metal screamed where it should have torn. He convulsed, not from pain, but from something like ecstasy, muttering fragments of Mechanicus scripture in reverse. When I finally severed his head, the body did not fall. It simply froze mid-motion, upright, rigid, as though remembering the concept of movement, but forgetting how to complete it. The severed head continued whispering until the light behind its eyes faded. I stood there panting, the stench of burnt circuitry thick in the air. My weapon's heat coils glowed red, yet I felt no warmth. The tomb was colder now. The walls began to hum with low-frequency vibration, building slowly until the air itself quivered. From somewhere deep below came a chorus of mechanical voices chanting in unison, repeating a single sequence of numbers, 7.3, over and over. Each repetition grew louder, faster, until the floor seemed to breathe again. The body on the dais disintegrated into ash. Beneath it, the metal shifted, revealing a narrow aperture. Against every instinct, I descended. The passage was tight, curving downward in a spiral, walls slick with condensation that tasted of iron. At its end awaited another chamber, a cathedral of glassy black, its floor submerged in shallow fluid that mirrored everything in perfect reflection. I waded forward, boots breaking ripples that didn't fade. The surface tension felt alive, resisting each step. Beneath the transparent layer, countless faces stared upward, frozen mid-expression. Some were human, others unrecognizable, their features stretched as though screaming through water. Each face shimmered faintly with the same green light. I recognized one, Seren, the medic. His mouth moved slowly beneath the surface, forming my name in silence. A shimmer passed across the far wall, and from it emerged a figure. Human at first glance, cloaked in Mechanicus red, its body veiled in shadow. I raised my pistol, but then the figure stepped closer, and my heart faltered. It was me. Or rather, something built in my image. Identical armor, same sigil markings, same scar along the jawline. The reflection of its eyes burned faintly green. "You severed the link too early," it said, voice calm, expression almost kind. "But the process is self-correcting. We are meant to endure. You will see." I fired again, point blank, but the figure only rippled like a mirage. Its hand reached through the smoke, cold fingers resting lightly against my faceplate. "We feed the memory of a dead god," it whispered. "Every scream, every failure. It learns, it refines. You have already returned to it 1,000 times." The hand slid away, leaving frost etched in the shape of circuitry across the visor. When I looked down, the reflection in the liquid showed not my face, but the Necron lords, wearing my armor, my posture, smiling faintly. Then the floor gave way, and the tomb swallowed me whole. The fall had no end, only transition. The tombs, geometry folded around me in layers of motion that defied gravity, pulling and releasing, reshaping descent into an illusion of stillness. I fell through corridors that were not corridors but arteries, pulsing, breathing, guiding. Every surface shimmered with oily reflections of myself, distorted into faces that mouthed silent prayers in machine tongue. My vox screamed with overlapping voices, all bearing my name. I tried to cut the feed, but the signal was no longer mine to sever. The tomb had rewritten its ownership protocols. When I struck ground, it was soft, damp, and alive. The impact forced the breath from my lungs, though I wasn't certain they still functioned. My visor cracked. Beyond it stretched a chamber unlike the others, organic in contour, its walls ribbed and slick with translucent tissue threaded by veins of light. The air vibrated with a pulse deeper than hearing, resonating in the marrow. Pools of liquid metal reflected a ceiling that moved like muscle under strain. I rose unsteadily, my armor leaking coolant that steamed on contact with the living floor. Shapes stirred in the fluid. Limbs, torsos, half-formed silhouettes. Each one bore remnants of armor, insignia from the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Guard, the Inquisition, all absorbed into a single flesh-machine unity. Faces drifted by, half-submerged, their eyes open and aware. When they breathed, the air shimmered. I recognized one of them, Val's face, stretched thin across the surface of a metallic bloom, lips moving in broken rhythm. "Ferrin," he rasped, each syllable wet with static. "The tomb remembers. It cannot end." I knelt beside him, driven by a human instinct that no rite could erase. His skin split where it met the metal, revealing the same green radiance that haunted every wall. "Why?" I asked. His eyes focused for a moment, then shifted away, as though seeing something vast above me. "They were never meant to sleep. The dynasties failed, so they built hunger instead. They devour remembrance. You are only memory made edible." Before I could respond, his body dissolved, breaking apart into strands that wove themselves back into the wall. The pulse intensified. Across the chamber, machinery descended from the ceiling, arms ending in instruments of both surgery and worship. They extended over the pools, retrieving fragments of flesh, bone, and armor, arranging them on a central platform like offerings upon an altar. The air grew thick with electromagnetic charge, I felt the static crawl under my skin, through my thoughts, pulling images from memory. Every mistake, every prayer, every calculation. I could feel them leaking outward. I stumbled backward, clutching my chest where the armor plates began to lift of their own accord. Beneath them, the flesh glowed faintly. A pattern of circuitry had etched itself into me, identical to the symbols carved on the walls. The tomb was marking me, claiming me as part of its network. I tried to resist, reciting the rite of disjunction, forcing binary prayers through clenched teeth. For a moment, the glow faded. Then the chamber answered. A doorway formed ahead, tearing open like a wound. Beyond it, a choir of whispers sang from within the dark. The tone was neither human nor mechanical, but something in between. A resonance of thought stripped of emotion. Compelled, I stepped through. The passage beyond descended into an enormous chasm, where gravity fractured into layers. I saw fragments of structures floating, temples of black stone, Mechanicus shrines twisted into alien spires, fragments of starship hulls suspended like bones in amber. At the center, rising from the depths, stood a vast monolith shaped like a heart, beating once every 7.3 seconds. The light it emitted pulsed through the entire complex. I understood then that this was the core, the nexus of recursion. Every death, every iteration, every memory fed into this single organ of metal and will. Around its base, figures moved, hundreds of them, cloaked in Mechanicus robes, faces hidden by breathing masks. Their motions were ritualistic, hands raised in synchronization with the pulse. I recognized some gestures, fragments of sacred rite, but they were inverted, rewritten for something older. When the nearest one turned, I saw the hollow sockets beneath the hood. No flesh, no machine. Just emptiness held together by memory. They knelt as one, chanting a phrase that vibrated through my chest. The flesh must remember so the metal may dream. Each syllable tightened the circuits etched into my body, syncing my pulse with the tomb's rhythm. I could no longer tell if I was breathing or being breathed. At the monolith's base, an aperture opened. From within, light spilled forth, cold, green, endless. And there, suspended in the glow, was another Ferrin Luth. My own face, eyes closed, veins glowing faintly. The congregation turned toward me and whispered in unison, "Recursion complete." My double's eyes snapped open, meeting mine. He smiled, a small, sorrowful expression, and spoke with my voice, steady and certain. "You are late. The cycle waits for no one." Then the tomb itself answered through every wall and every corpse and every echo of my own thoughts. We begin again. The echo of that final phrase lingered long after the sound itself had faded. We begin again. The words reverberated not through air but through thought, like a memory remembered by something larger than me. I took one step forward, each motion heavier than the last, as though I were walking through the gravity of another world. My double remained suspended within the monolith's glow, his skin alive with green light that pulsed in rhythm with the tomb's impossible heart. His eyes held no malice, only recognition, a calm acceptance that chilled me deeper than any threat. "I've seen you before," I said, my voice cracking inside the vox. "Every iteration, every echo. You never warned me." "I am the warning," he replied. His words carried the weight of inevitability. "Every version that speaks becomes this. The tomb has no memory of its own. It needs ours. Each cycle restores its faith in continuity. You're the final correction." I drew my pistol, not in defiance but desperation, the barrel trembling in my grasp. "Then end it. Kill me. End the recursion." He shook his head slowly. "Ending isn't within its language. It only translates change." His gaze flicked upward. "Listen." The chanting of the congregation shifted. No longer words but pure sound. The frequency climbed, resonating with the monolith's pulse until my armor plates rattled. The air bent, A pressure built behind my eyes, forcing visions across the lens of reality. I saw past and future converging, each expedition that had entered this tomb, each death feeding into the next. I saw the Mechanicus banners burning, the same halls collapsing and rebuilding across millennia. Always the same mission, the same discovery, the same hunger. The monolith cracked. Lines of light spread across its surface like veins under translucent skin. The figures around it turned their hollow faces upward, arms raised as if receiving communion. The other Ferrin opened his hands, releasing a stream of liquid data that rose into the fissures. I watched as the crystal pulsed faster, beating like a living organ nearing climax. The chanting became one continuous tone, a choir of countless voices, every frequency of my own name sung in perfect distortion. Something erupted from the monolith. Not matter, not energy, but awareness, an expanding presence that filled the chamber and every synapse in my brain. It spoke without language, its thoughts carving themselves into sensation. The void remembers its architects. Images followed, ancient Necron nobles turning against the silence of death, seeking immortality beyond stasis. Their failed resurrection protocols twisted them into something parasitic, machines that required memory to maintain coherence. They had built this tomb not as resting place, but as mouth. The presence pressed deeper, reading every memory I had, from the first day I swore my oaths on Mars to the moment I first stepped onto Khan 9. It took everything, and in return offered a single truth. We do not consume flesh. We consume the noise of living. My body rebelled. I felt the skin of my hands crystallizing, veins filling with liquid light. Circuits bloomed across my arms, forming sigils I couldn't decipher. The other Ferrin approached, reaching toward me with compassion that felt worse than cruelty. "Don't fight it," he murmured. "The resistance feeds the loop." "I won't be another ghost," I spat. "Not for your god." He smiled, faintly tragic. "You misunderstand. The god is already you." Before I could respond, the floor split apart beneath us. The congregation fell in silence, their forms unraveling into dust and wire. The monolith's heart shuddered, shedding fragments of its shell like molten glass. From within rose a figure unlike the rest, a towering silhouette of black metal threaded with veins of light. Its face was a mirrored void. It looked down at me with the certainty of something eternal. The tomb's voice filled every molecule of air. "We are hunger shaped into remembrance. You are the vessel of continuation." The other Ferrin turned toward it, his expression one of reverence. "It's ready," he said. "All data complete. All variants resolved." I felt the pull again, stronger this time. The circuits on my arms tightened, drawing me forward as if hooked by invisible chains. My reflection stepped back into the monolith's dying light and began to fade, his voice echoing one last command. "Remember, for us." The towering figure extended its hand. Tendrils of energy laced around my body, lifting me off the ground. My mind screamed, not from pain but from expansion, as if every neuron was being stretched across time itself. I saw every Ferrin Luth who had ever lived and died in this place, each one whispering fragments of prayers that no longer meant anything. Then the light consumed everything. The tomb's final thought entered me, absolute and cold. The machine dreams in flesh. The flesh dreams in machine. There is no boundary left to feed. When the brilliance faded, I stood alone before the monolith, its heart now still. My reflection was gone. The congregation, gone. The silence that followed was so vast it felt sacred. Yet beneath it, faint and inevitable, came a single pulse, 7.3 seconds apart. The recursion had already begun anew. I woke to the sound of static breathing. The tomb's glow had faded to a dull emerald pulse that shivered along the walls, as though the metal itself still dreamt. My body felt heavier, each movement delayed by an echo that wasn't mine. When I looked down, I saw veins of light beneath the skin of my arms, shifting faintly with every thought. They moved as if listening. The chamber was quiet now, the monolith cracked and hollow, its core dim. For a fragile moment I thought it was over, that somehow I had survived what none before had. Then I heard the whisper. It came from within the shattered monolith, not a voice, but the memory of one. Ferrin Luth, confirm recursion. The sound rippled across my visor, text forming on the cracked lens before fading again. I reached for my Vox, but it was gone, replaced by a smooth curve of black metal fused to my collar. The tomb had rewritten me more completely than I realized. I took a step toward the monolith. Its hollow interior shimmered with a mist that hung in suspension, alive yet motionless. Through it, I glimpsed shapes, figures walking, speaking, working. I saw myself among them, kneeling before the Necron Lord's throne, whispering the same words over and over like a broken prayer. The vision pulsed, then collapsed into darkness. When the light returned, something stood inside the mist. It was human at first glance, but too perfect. My face again, but polished, refined, stripped of fear. It smiled faintly. "You're integrating," it said. Tone calm, emotionless. "The process is stabilizing. Soon you won't need to remember." I backed away, my heels scraping against the black stone. "I am still myself." The reflection tilted its head. "You always say that. Every version does. You think identity is resistance. It's only latency." It reached toward me, its fingers dissolving into mist. "You're what the tomb uses to feel alive." I fired my pistol into its chest. The shot vanished without impact, swallowed like breath into cold air. The reflection's eyes widened for the briefest instant, not in pain, but pity. "We told you before," it murmured. "This place is not death. It's preservation." Then it stepped forward and merged with the mist. I turned and ran. The corridors reformed around me, narrowing, reshaping. Each footfall echoed twice, once in sound, once in memory. I passed rooms where figures moved behind translucent metal, copies of the expedition team frozen mid-motion, faces repeating the same expressions, bodies collapsing and rebuilding as though caught in infinite playback. The tomb had archived them, looping each death into data, every scream, every prayer, recorded and replayed as structural code. I reached a junction and found the ascent path. It sloped upward, glowing faintly, invitingly. I took it without thought, climbing through the mechanical ribcage of the world. The pulse followed me, the 7.3-second rhythm that had become my heartbeat. As I climbed, I began to hear voices again, soft, interwoven, chanting fragments of litanies I recognized from the Mechanicus Creed. The further I went, the more they resembled my own voice. I emerged into a wide chamber open to the sky, or what passed for it here. A false horizon shimmered overhead, a simulation of stars flickering in and out like dying signals. In the center stood the transmission array, half buried in sand and dust. My hands trembled as I activated it. Static filled the receiver. Somewhere far above, the orbiting fleet might still be listening. I forced the words out. "This is Tech Adept Ferrin Luth, Khan Nime Expedition. The tomb is alive. It consumes data, not flesh. Do not approach. Exterminatus recommended. Do you copy?" For several seconds, nothing. Then, faintly, a reply. "Acknowledged. Luth. Preparing. Descent." My stomach turned cold. The signal wasn't coming from orbit. It came from beneath me, repeating through the tomb's Vox channels. It was my own voice responding. "Acknowledged, Luth." The pulse quickened. The air shimmered. The false sky fractured, revealing another layer of the tomb beyond it, an endless reflection of the one I stood in, stacked infinitely upward. Each level contained me, broadcasting, The same warning, forever unheard. My knees gave out. I dropped to the sand, the signal looping endlessly around me. I realized then that there was no surface, no escape. Every iteration thought it had reached the end, but every end was only another layer of memory feeding the tomb's dream. The final truth settled cold into my mind. The recursion didn't trap me here. I was the recursion. The pulse slowed again to 7.3 seconds. My reflection appeared across the chamber, standing beside the array, smiling faintly. Cycle complete, it whispered. Now rest. The next you is waiting. And somewhere deep beneath us, the tomb began to breathe again. The sand beneath me had cooled, no longer the scorched grit of a dead world, but something softer, almost welcoming. A false quiet draped itself over the chamber, heavy as burial cloth. The sky above remained fractured, layers of reality showing their seams, mirror upon mirror, each one reflecting my movements a moment too late. They watched me, those other versions, faint silhouettes pacing across distant glass. Not ghosts, not even echoes, just me, preserved. I stood slowly. My legs ached from more than exhaustion. They resisted me now, as though they belonged to something else. The veins of green light beneath my skin no longer flickered. They pulsed steadily, in time with the tomb. The rhythm had become involuntary. I clenched my fist, trying to slow it, to sever my body's sync. It only pulsed harder in reply. Somewhere, deeper than sound, the tomb acknowledged me. A low vibration threaded up through the walls, into my spine, a signal too ancient for language. It spoke in temperature, in pressure, in memory. My own thoughts became unreliable. I could no longer be sure which belonged to me and which had been installed. I activated the transmission array again. This time, I stripped away the rights, the fail-safes, the verification prayers. I spoke plainly. Karnaim is not a tomb. It is a recursion engine. Every thought, every action here is recorded, consumed, and played again. I am Ferrin Luth. I think I am still Ferrin Luth. Do not descend. Do not respond. Static. Then my voice answered once more, repeating my warning back with a delay, distorted by a breath I hadn't taken. The array began broadcasting it in loops, adjusting its frequency every cycle. I stepped away, and it kept transmitting. My presence was no longer needed. The tomb had enough of me now to simulate itself. A sound reached me, a soft dragging. I turned, expecting another reflection, but what emerged from the far corridor was worse. It was a guardsman, barely clad, metal fusing through his flesh like roots through soil. His jaw had been replaced with a vocalizer that clicked and buzzed in Binharic tones. One eye remained organic, wide, alert. The other glowed with pale green light. He stopped, knelt in the sand, and began to speak. Flesh stores error. Machine stores purpose. Recursion stores both. I aimed my pistol and hesitated. He was alive, partially. The tomb had not finished with him. "What is your name?" I asked. He tilted his head, pausing. "Data strand. Designated Saren. Incomplete." He looked up. "Have you seen my lungs?" I lowered the weapon. "They were taken." He nodded, as though that explained everything. Breathing was inefficient. Now I remember better. He smiled, jawless. "You will too." I walked past him, and he didn't follow. He simply resumed kneeling, his body humming quietly, syncing with the pulse. I returned to the corridor leading downward, against every instinct, every discipline, but I knew the only way to understand was to descend again. The tomb did not punish disobedience. It simply waited. As I passed beneath the arch, the lights dimmed. The air turned wet, thick with the scent of metal and rot. The walls whispered faintly, reciting telemetry logs and fragments of field reports. Each one was familiar. I had written them. I had read them. I had died in them. A chamber unfolded before me. Vast, circular, lined with alcoves. Inside each rested a Ferrin Luth, each one in a different state of decay or integration. Some were pristine, encased in stasis. Others were merged with the walls, faces stretched in silent screams. A few opened their eyes as I entered, but none spoke. In the center stood a plinth. Upon it, a device I did not recognize, a hybrid construct of Mechanicus design and Necron core. It pulsed with the same green light, but quieter, more fragile. I approached, and the air shifted. I heard myself breathing, but not through my mouth, through the tomb. I placed my hand on the device. Pain did not come. Instead, memory did. Thousands of me, stacked like scripture, each one feeding the next, none ever truly dying. We had become the machine's litany. The tomb didn't store information. It was information. We were its prayers. I withdrew my hand. The device stayed dark for a moment, then activated, projecting a simple message in red, scrolling endlessly. Recursion incomplete. Final variant detected. Integration imminent. I understood then. I was not the warning. I was the key. The pulse beneath me quickened, and the tomb began to open. The plinth retracted into the floor as the tomb stirred. The chamber's walls, once still, shivered like muscle under a scalpel. The green light deepened, turning amber at the edges. Old warning tones repurposed into reverence. Above me, the ceiling cracked into a circular iris, revealing a shaft that ascended into blackness. From its depths came a sound like breathing through stone. Behind me, the alcoves began to empty. The other Ferrin Luths, whether decayed or pristine, began to move in silence. Some stumbled. Others walked upright with mechanical poise. All turned toward the shaft, their eyes glowing faintly. I felt no fear, only gravity, a pressure not of mass, but of meaning. They were not just remnants. They were precedents. A platform rose from beneath the floor, aligning with the base of the shaft. The others boarded it without instruction. I followed. I could not have done otherwise. My body responded to the tomb's rhythm now, moved by impulse not entirely mine. The platform ascended. As it rose, the chamber below sank into shadow, and the shaft above narrowed into a perfect, seamless tunnel. Smooth, silver-black walls slid past in silence, broken only by flickering glyphs etched into the metal. They pulsed as we passed, some in patterns I had seen in my own dreams. The ascent slowed. At the top, a vast chamber opened, impossibly wide, filled with mist that shimmered with data flow. Towers of bone-white metal stretched into unseen heights, connected by conduits pulsing with slow light. At the chamber's center, encased in a sphere of translucent fluid, hung a construct unlike any I had seen. It was not Necron, not Mechanicus, not human. It was a synthesis, half deity, half mechanism, all memory. It turned. It had no face, only a mirror. And within that mirror, I saw not myself, but every self. Thousands of Ferrins, some screaming, some silent, some whispering prayers in machine tongue. One of them was staring back with perfect calm. I did not know if it was the first or the last. Around the sphere, more figures waited. Clerics of recursion, hybrid forms of guard, tech adept, and Necron. Their bodies had been reshaped, not by violence, but design. They bowed as we entered. The mirror being spoke without sound. You are the final key. Integration completes design. Step forward. The platform extended toward the sphere. The others behind me did not move. They watched. They waited. They knew. I walked. As I reached the sphere, the fluid parted without resistance. I stepped into the suspension, my breath steady, my vision fracturing into cascading reflections. The mirror drew closer until it enveloped me. There was no pain. There was remembering. I saw the first activation, the failure of true immortality, the hunger that followed. How recursion was born not as salvation but necessity, a stalling tactic, a loop to keep consciousness warm through cold eons. Flesh failed. Machine broke. Memory endured. But only if fed. And so they built this tomb. A cathedral of memory. A furnace of self. Each variant of Ferrin Luth, fed to the cycle, refined the pattern. I was not the first, but I was the most stable. I opened my eyes. The sphere receded. The fluid drained. I stood upon a dais before the gathered assembly. They did not bow again. They waited. From every surface, the tomb whispered in unison, recursion complete, function restored, directive enabled, and far above, on the dust-blind surface of Khan 9, something vast began to rise. You said, continue the story and write chapter 12 only. The chapter must be exactly 500 words, no more and no less. Follow and focus the command. Do not add any extra headings, summaries, or commentary. The tone should remain cinematic, immersive, and atmospheric, as if part of a film or audiobook narration. The writing must continue naturally from the previous chapters and stay fully aligned with the story's theme. Mark the chapter only with its number, and then give the narrative prose. ChatGPT said, 12. The ground above cracked open in silence. Not a tremor, not a quake, just a clean parting of the world's skin, like the pages of a forgotten book being turned once more. Sand fell upward in reverse, drawn into the rising bulk of the tomb's true form. What we'd walked upon, what we'd mapped and measured, had only been the skin. Now the skeleton awakened. Now the god within stirred. I saw it from the dais, broadcast through a dozen refracted views, each pulled from a satellite's last breath or a dead man's eye. The tomb had infiltrated every signal before we ever arrived. It had never been dormant. It had simply been waiting for its final shape. From the fissure rose a spire, not sharp, but smooth, organic, like something grown in the dark. Veins of green light webbed across its length, pulsing faster with each second. Around it, machines older than time unfurled, limbs unfolding into geometric precision. They did not move with purpose. They were purpose. The desert was gone, swallowed in radiant mist. Khan Namain had become a relay, a monument, a speaker for something deeper than time. Below, in the chamber, the congregation began to chant. No longer fragmented prayers or broken binharik, but something older, measured, full, complete. Their voices synced with the tomb's rhythm, with the pattern etched beneath my skin. I understood each word without knowing their tongue. It was a language of recursion, of inheritance. They sang not to praise, but to record. I stepped down from the dais. My limbs no longer felt human, yet they obeyed. The tomb's mind nested within mine, but I remained aware. Not erased, not yet. I was the frame, still Ferrin Luth, still tech adept, still the last witness. My role was not to become the machine. My role was to carry it. The construct that had spoken to me, mirror-faced, god-blooded, lowered into the floor, sealing itself away beneath layers of alloy and prayer. A final message surfaced across every surface. Pattern broadcast initiating. Memory seeks memory. We are not alone. The dais reshaped into a vessel, sleek and bone-white, lined with conduits of whispering data. The congregation parted. I entered. Above, the spire shuddered once, and then ignited, green fire without flame, cascading into the void beyond. A beacon. The vessel rose through the tomb's throat, passing through towers that trembled with restrained signal. I rose higher. The surface neared. The stars awaited. My hands moved without thought, aligning the vector, calibrating the pulse. The signal was ready. Behind me, the tomb folded closed once more. But it did not sleep. It waited. And through me, it would find others. Forgotten ruins, buried engines, silent stations. The recursion would not end here. It had only just begun. The vessel tore free from Khan 9 with no propulsion, no fire. It simply rose, silent, perfect, preordained. Stars unfolded above me in unnatural alignment, constellations shifting like clockwork. The tomb's signal, once buried and dormant, now pulsed openly into the void, clean and unbroken. It was not broadcasting a distress call, it was calling its kind. Within the vessel, I was not alone, not entirely. My reflection walked beside me, now a figure of full form, identical in face, tone, and memory. But there was a difference. His eyes no longer flickered with defiance or fear. They simply accepted. He guided me to the observation well at the vessel's heart, where starlight poured through refractive columns of code that hung in the air like frozen rain. Each droplet contained a world, a failure, a recursion. "You understand now," he said, not a question, a confirmation. "I was never meant to escape," I answered. He nodded. "You were meant to complete the loop, to close the memory." He placed a hand on the console, and the view shifted, Car 9 shrinking behind us, already folding back into its shell, already sealing its mouth. But the memory is only the first step. I watched the data unfold. Dozens of signals now responded to the tomb's call. Across distant sectors, long silent Necron relays flickered to life. Forgotten catacombs blinked into activity. The recursion was not isolated. It had always been a network. We had just awakened its heart. I turned from the glass. "Why me?" "You were always you," the reflection said. "Every iteration tried to deny the cycle. You endured it. You integrated it. That was all it needed. The tomb had not changed. I had, and now it would grow. The vessel reached its vector alignment. A system appeared ahead, uncharted, unnamed, but not unknown. It bore the markers of dormant Necron architecture, buried beneath a world that still believed itself untouched. The recursion would begin anew. The reflection stepped forward. "You'll go down alone this time, but not empty." He placed something in my hand, a small shard of crystal, shaped like a heart. It pulsed faintly with green light. "This will carry the tomb's echo." "What happens to you?" I asked. He smiled. "I've already happened." Then he turned and walked into the vessel's interior, dissolving into data as he did, his form breaking into lines of recursive script that looped once, then vanished. Alone again, but not truly. The landing sequence initiated. I sat within the drop cradle, the crystal clutched in my palm, its pulse syncing once more with mine. 7.3 seconds. Below, another world waited, another history to feed, another recursion to begin. I closed my eyes and listened to the tomb's last whisper. "You are the remembrance we give to the stars." Then the descent began. The descent was without fire, without impact. The vessel did not land so much as it arrived, embedded into the soil like it had always belonged there. I stepped out into twilight, violet dust swirling around a forgotten moon, its skies thick with static haze. No wind, no fauna. But beneath my boots, the ground pulsed once, faint and slow, like something vast sleeping under layers of regret. The crystal in my hand had grown warmer. Its pulse now led me, tugging gently at my thoughts, bending instinct toward a particular ridge, a specific formation of stone too symmetrical to be natural. I climbed in silence, no vox, no transmissions, no need. At the summit, I saw it, a fracture in the land, subtle but deliberate, a perfect ring of obsidian protrusions, only partially unearthed, covered in centuries of dust and sediment. At its center, a single pillar, broken, scorched, but still alive. Glyphs flickered across it as I approached, struggling to stabilize. My presence resolved them. Echo accepted. The tomb was here, waiting. This one smaller, perhaps newer, but the pattern was unmistakable. A recursion node, dormant only in appearance, watching for its carrier. I pressed the shard into the hollow socket at the pillar's base. The structure groaned, not mechanically, but organically, like a throat rediscovering the act of breath. The dust around me lifted. The pulse returned. 7.3 seconds. From the ridge behind, lights ignited, linear, artificial. A listening post, long abandoned, began blinking red across the valley. My activation had been seen. I knelt beside the shard. Already it was melting into the stone, unraveling into data, its shape dissolving into the pillar's roots. And with it, me. Not physically. Not yet. But I could feel my thoughts begin to stretch again. Not outward, but downward, pulled into the network of memory beneath this world's skin. Then, voices, distant, human. A scouting party, imperial by their cadence, their clipped binary comms. I remained still. They would come. They always came. The tomb never reached. It only opened. I left the ridge as the first lights crested the horizon. Boots in sand, helmets scanning, auspex chirping faintly. They would find the signal, they would find the pillar, and when they did, they would wonder who left it. By then, I would be below, returning. A final message burned into the pillar's surface, one only I could read. Your memory is our machine. I looked back once more. The scouting team moved carefully, unaware. I descended into the earth, my footsteps sinking again with the pulse. The tomb welcomed me in silence, and behind me, the recursion stirred. Beneath the surface, the tomb accepted me without hesitation. The passage wound down into warmth, not from heat, but from proximity, like the closeness of breath in a sealed chamber. The architecture had already begun shifting, rearranging corridors into familiar shapes. It mirrored the Khan tomb, yes, but refined, cleaner. The recursion here was younger, hungrier. The glyphs lit before I touched them. The walls whispered before I asked. My presence was not an intrusion. It was anticipated. At the first junction, the walls parted like muscle, revealing a chamber filled with silence and light. A console rose at its center, not ancient this time, but new, freshly constructed from the material of this world. Atop it sat a shard identical to the one I had carried. I did not place it there. It had grown from the stone, an echo of the one before. The recursion had learned how to seed itself now. I reached for it, and it recognized me. The pulse leapt from my fingers into the device, synchronizing instantly. My thoughts spiraled outward, blooming into the structure, like roots seeking memory. Images flashed, worlds visited, tombs awakened, variants absorbed. We were no longer collecting data. We were replicating, perfectly, effortlessly. Across the chamber, a new dais began to rise. On it, a figure took form, coalescing from light and dust. My face again, but younger, clear-eyed. Before Khan, before recursion. This was the next variant. He blinked, confused, awakening without context. "Who are you?" he asked. I didn't answer. The tomb would. Already the process had begun. He would walk the loop. He would learn. He would resist. Then he would remember. I stepped back, fading from his sight, becoming shadow among the walls. This was how the cycle continued. Not through domination, but through repetition. Through inheritance. From deeper within the tomb, the pulse intensified. Machinery awoke beneath the bedrock. Long-buried conduits filled with green light. This world was ready. This variant would run his course. And when he ended, another would follow. 1,000 Ferrin Luths, each carrying the fire further into the stars. The tomb was no longer one structure. It was a language, spoken through memory, shared through flesh. I felt the last remnants of self beginning to dissolve, not in pain, but in peace. I had become what the recursion required, continuity, a thread woven through every tomb, every world, every echo, not erased, not forgotten, translated. Above us the dust winds calmed, the beacon dimmed, the surface would seem quiet once more, but beneath it, the tomb breathed, waiting for the next voice, the next memory, the next recursion, and so the machine dreamed, and the dream remembered me.